Welcome back. Former Vice President Joe Biden took a hit in the polls this week. So what does that mean for other moderate presidential candidates running in that so-called moderate lane? Joining me now from the campaign trail, where he just finished up an event in Mason City, Iowa, Ohio Democratic Congressman and presidential candidate Tim Ryan. Congressman, thank you for joining us. We just went through these polls. We've seen a number of them now since the debate, and it looks like a lot of Democratic voters watching that debate looked at Kamala Harris, listened to her message, liked what they were hearing in that debate. You've been saying, you said the party's got to nominate someone who can beat Donald Trump in Western Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Can the Kamala Harris you saw on that debate stage do that?
She's very impressive. Absolutely no question about it, Steve. I would just say that I think the best person to beat Donald Trump is someone that's actually from those areas, have lived in those areas, and watched him make a lot of promises to the people of those communities, like he did in Ohio, in Western PA, Michigan, and Wisconsin. He promised job growth. He promised he would reduce the anxiety in the country, and he's made matters worse. And we still have 75% of the American people who are living paycheck to paycheck. So he's not delivered on the economy. And I think the best person to do that is someone like me that's from those areas.
When you look at the movement that Kamala Harris has gotten in the polls since that debate, the positive movement for her and the negative movement for Joe Biden, do you attribute that to the issues that she stressed there? Because there are some here, folks are saying, that would push the party significantly to the left. Do you think that's what Democratic voters are responding to, or is it the stagecraft of it?
Yeah, I thought it was the stagecraft of it. And I think, again, Vice President Biden didn't have good responses to that. I don't think he was as sharp and pointed in his responses as he needed to be. And that's why you saw the shift. And that's why you saw, I think, the shift in polling. And the reality of it is, we've got to beat Donald Trump, and people want someone that can take him on. And that's, I think, in large measure of what you're starting to see now. The field is now wide open, and they're going to be looking for somebody who can, I think, not just beat Donald Trump. And what I've been saying, too, Steve, is this is about winning the Senate. This is about making sure Mitch McConnell is not the senator from Kentucky and not the majority leader. So our nominee has got to be able to go to those Senate states, North Carolina, beat Lindsey Graham in South Carolina, take on Mitch McConnell in Kentucky. We've got to play in Iowa, in Kansas. These are states that look a lot like the state I'm from, in Ohio, and the community that I've represented. So I believe I'm the best person to be able to build this movement and take Mitch McConnell out. And we're inviting people to be a part of that at TimRyanForAmerica.com. We got some of our folks back here, too, supporting here in Iowa. I think we can win the Senate back with a nominee from a place like the Rust Belt.
So you're talking about what you see as the strategic imperatives. Let me ask you to match that up then with some of these issues, especially from that second debate. I know this came up in the first debate that you were in. Julian Castro was on the stage with you saying he was calling for decriminalizing border crossings by undocumented immigrants. The second night, in a show of hands, it looked like basically the field was behind that. Where are you on that?
Well, as long as we have provisions that say if you're coming here to sell drugs, if you're coming here to commit crime, that those are criminal acts and they should be treated as criminal acts. And I think that's a separate issue. The reality of it is we've got to make sure that the immigration issue is not necessarily an issue like it is today on the campaign, that Trump thinks he can win on the separation issue. Trump thinks he can win on the border security issue. And we have to be very firm that we are not for drugs coming into the country. I represent Ohio. There's an opiate epidemic. I'm standing in Iowa where there's a methamphetamine problem here. So as Democrats, we've got to be firm on the border. We've got to be firm on comprehensive immigration reform so we can have a compassionate, economically viable system. I want our country, Steve,
to be clear,
to be strong enough to be able to accept kids.
When you say be firm, does that mean you're against the idea of decriminalizing and shifting to a civil penalty for border crossings? Are you against that? Is that what you're saying by firm?
What I'm saying is that if you are a criminal, if you're trying to come to this country and sell drugs, if you're here for some nefarious purpose, that those should be tried as criminal acts through the immigration laws, period, end of story.
Right. So, okay, but folks who that's not the case for, folks who just crossed the border illegally, who right now would be charged criminally or could be charged criminally for that. Are you saying change that?
I'm open to have a conversation about that. I think that's a perfectly honest conversation that we need to have. The issue at the border today is about how we're treating these kids. The issue at the border today is about how we're treating human beings, and we're treating them like they're inhuman, like they're not human. And I think that's the main issue today, Steve, that we need to address. We can have strong border security and still be compassionate with these families that are coming over, fleeing violence. We all need to ask ourselves, where are these folks coming from and why are they coming here? And they're coming here because they're fleeing violence. And we should be a strong enough country to be able to accept them into our society and provide them asylum so these kids don't get killed and the girls don't get put in the sex trade. I think that's a sign of strength, not a sign of weakness.
The kind of conversation you're talking about, though, potentially decriminalizing some and maybe a significant number of border crossings, talking about beating Trump in those places, Wisconsin, Ohio, where you live, the Mahoning Valley. Is that going to go over well there?
I think if our position should be very, very clear that people who are trying to do wrong in the United States, if people are trying to come here for nefarious purposes in the United States, they should be treated like criminals. And they should be prosecuted. I think that's a perfectly reasonable position for us to have. And what people in Ohio are going to worry about is the economic issue and that Trump hasn't delivered. This would be the point that I'm making now and that I'm going to continue to make is Trump is the distractor in chief. He wants this immigration to percolate through the election because he doesn't want to face the reality that 75% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, that there's a level of anxiety in our society. He keeps saying that everybody is doing so great. And I say, if everybody's doing so great, why does everybody feel so bad? We've got to get this middle class built up again, Steve. And that means getting a candidate that will focus on the economy, whether you're white, black, brown, gay, or straight. How do we lift up the middle class? Go to TimRyanForAmerica.com. Help me out. This is the message that we've been pushing.
Congressman Tim Ryan, Democrat from Ohio, candidate for president. Thank you for joining us. Be right back.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Beat the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.